Sir, the service entrance is around the back of the building. Drivers and couriers are not permitted in here. The words came out clean and practiced the way a person speaks when they have said something so many times it no longer requires thought. Diane Hartley did not lower her voice. She did not hesitate. She looked across the warm, amber light of the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal at the man who had just walked through the heavy glass doors, and she made her decision in the space of a single breath. The man stopped walking. He stood just inside the entrance, a leather backpack hanging from one shoulder, rain still beating on the fabric of his navy hoodie. He looked around the lounge, slowly, the way a person does when they are not sure whether someone is speaking to them or to someone else. There was no one behind him. There was no one beside him. There was only the soft jazz drifting from the ceiling speakers, the low hum of climate-controlled air and the sound of his own breathing. He looked back at Diane. "Are you speaking to me?" he asked. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that does not need volume to fill a room. "I am." Diane stepped out from behind the sweeping mahogany desk. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight slightly forward, a posture she had perfected over 6 years of managing this terminal. Her voice did not drop. If anything, it climbed just slightly, enough to reach the couples near the fireplace, the man on the bar stool with his sparkling water, the woman flipping through a magazine in the far corner. This is a private executive terminal. It is not a waiting area for couriers, rideshare drivers, or anyone without a verified arrival on file. I'm going to need you to leave before I have to make this unpleasant for both of us. The man did not move. He did not argue. He did not raise his hands. He did not pull out a phone or a wallet or a credential of any kind. He simply stood in the entrance of the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal at Teterboro Airport on a cold, rain-soaked Tuesday evening in November, and he was still. Completely unnervingly still. The jazz kept playing. A woman near the fireplace glanced up from her magazine, then looked back down without committing to a reaction. The man on the bar stool, sharp pinstripe suit, monogrammed garment bag at his feet, the practiced posture of someone accustomed to being in rooms like this one, turned a quarter turn on his stool and looked over his shoulder. Diane held her position. She was not afraid of silence. Silence was a tool she had used before in situations just like this one. The silence said, "I am waiting." The silence said, "This can end quietly or this can end loudly, and the choice is yours." The man in the navy hoodie looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were dark and calm, and there was something in them that Diane could not quite categorize. Not anger, not embarrassment, not the flicker of retreat she usually saw at this point in the exchange. It was something quieter. Something that looked in a way she would not be able to explain later, almost like patience. "All right," he said finally. Not in defeat. In something else entirely. He did not turn back toward the street doors. He took one slow step to the side, shifted the backpack on his shoulder, and stood looking out at the rain-slicked tarmac through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall at the far end of the lounge. His back was now to Diane. His back was to all of them. He was looking at the ramp outside, dark and wet and empty, lit by the amber glow of floodlights that turned the rain into golden threads. He was looking at a specific parking spot closest to the glass. Empty for now. He appeared to be waiting for something. Diane looked at him. Then she looked at the man on the bar stool, who gave a small, tight shake of his head and turned back to his water. What Diane Hartley did not know, what she could not have known, what not a single person in that warm and carefully curated lounge could have known, was that the man she had just ordered out of her terminal owned it. He had signed the acquisition papers at 9 o'clock that morning. He had flown back from Manhattan to confirm the deal, changed into whatever was comfortable, and driven himself to the airport. And in less than 8 minutes, a $72 million jet was going to park itself directly outside that glass wall. To prove it. Rewind 12 minutes. Teterboro Airport in New Jersey does not look like what most people imagine when they think of an airport. There are no terminal buildings the size of shopping malls, no departure boards cycling through 300 destinations, no families dragging overstuffed suitcases through fluorescent corridors. Teterboro is something else entirely. It is 42 acres of private runway on the western edge of the Meadowlands, and it exists for one purpose: to move the people who own the world from one part of it to another, quickly, quietly, and without the inconvenience of being seen by anyone who does not belong in the same category. The tarmac on a busy evening is crowded with machines that most people will only ever see in photographs. Gulfstreams, Challengers, Falcons, the occasional Boeing business jet sitting apart from the others like a cathedral among chapels. The ramp crew moves between them with quiet efficiency, their yellow rain gear bright against the dark November sky. The whole operation has the atmosphere of something that has been running smoothly for so long that urgency would feel out of place. The Pinnacle Aviation Terminal is the crown jewel of the Teterboro FBO network. FBO, Fixed Base Operator, is the industry term for the private terminals that serve private aircraft. Most people have never set foot in one. The Pinnacle Terminal does not advertise itself. It does not need to. Its clients have been coming here for years, and they come because the lobby looks more like a boutique hotel than a transit facility. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A fireplace in the east corner that burns real wood from October through March. Leather furniture in warm caramel tones. A bar along the north wall stocked with things that do not appear on any menu because the staff already knows what each regular prefers. Jazz from the ceiling speakers low enough to feel like atmosphere rather than music. It is in every sense a room designed to communicate a single thing: you belong here. Marcus Ellison had been using this terminal for 3 years. He used it at least twice a month. He knew the ramp crew by name. He knew that the fireplace was gas in the warmest months and real wood once the temperature dropped. He knew that the espresso machine behind the bar made the best long black he had found outside of Melbourne, and he sometimes arrived early just to sit with one before his flight. He was not early tonight. Tonight, Marcus Ellison was running on 6 hours of sleep spread across 3 days, a cold cup of coffee he had grabbed at Penn Station and abandoned in a cab, and the specific bone-deep exhaustion of a man who has spent 72 hours in a windowless conference room defending something he built from nothing. The hostile acquisition bid had come from a European logistics consortium that had been circling Ellison Global Systems for 18 months. Marcus had known it was coming. He had prepared for it. He had sat across the table from 11 lawyers and 4 investment bankers, and 2 men who believed that their suits and their accents and their combined net worth gave them the right to dismantle what someone else had built, and he had not flinched once. The bid had been rejected. The deal had been restructured on his terms. By Sunday afternoon, it was over. By Tuesday evening, Marcus Ellison just wanted to go home, or rather the closest thing to home that the next 48 hours would allow, which was London, where his European operations director was waiting, and where a set of meetings had been scheduled for months and could not be moved. His tailored suits were already on the aircraft. Captain Okafor had collected them from his Manhattan apartment that afternoon. Marcus himself had left the boardroom in what he was wearing, a worn Navy University of Chicago hoodie he had owned since his doctoral program, faded dark jeans, white sneakers with a slight crease across the left toe. He was carrying the leather backpack he had owned for 11 years, the one with the split seam on the left pocket that he kept meaning to have repaired. He had driven himself to Teterboro in a black Chevy Suburban with no plates that identified it as belonging to anyone in particular. He was 41 years old, and he was the founder and chief executive of Ellison Global Systems, a supply chain analytics company that had gone public 2 years ago at a valuation of $9.4 billion. The company had 17,000 employees in 23 countries. Marcus's personal net worth, as of the most recent Forbes estimate, was $11.2 billion. He had been on the cover of that magazine twice. The second time, he had not known about it until his assistant texted him a photo, and he had laughed for the first time in a week. He was one of 17 black billionaires in the United States. He was also a man who had learned over the course of a lifetime that none of those numbers traveled with him when he walked into a room wearing something that did not announce them. He had learned this at 24 as a first-year consulting associate, when a senior partner in his own firm had pointed him toward the freight elevator. He had learned it at 31 when a hotel concierge in Chicago had asked him to use the side entrance. He had learned it in airports and boardrooms and restaurants and parking lots in 100 variations on the same fundamental theme. He was deeply, quietly, intimately familiar with what certain rooms did when a man who looked like him walked through their doors without advance notice. He pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal at 7:14 p.m., wiped a bead of cold rain from his forehead, and took a long breath. The warm air hit him first. The familiar scent of the terminal espresso and leather, and the low, woody smoke from the fireplace. The jazz. The amber light. He crossed the marble floor toward the front desk. He was not thinking about Diane Hartley. He was thinking about the long black espresso he was going to order while he waited for his departure slot and the 8 hours of sleep he was going to get somewhere over the Atlantic. He had almost reached the desk when her voice cut across the room. "Sir, the service entrance is around the back of the building. Drivers and couriers are not permitted in here." Marcus stopped walking. He looked around slowly. He looked back at Diane. And in the space of that single moment, without a word, without a gesture, without anything at all, he recognized the situation entirely. He had been in this room before. Not this room specifically, but this room. This exact room in 100 different buildings, in 100 different cities across 20 years of a life he had built with his hands and his mind, and the kind of relentless, sleepless work that very few people would ever fully understand. He recognized it. And for the first time in a long time, standing in the warm light of a terminal he now owned, he made a choice that was different from every choice he had made in rooms like this before. He was going to stay. He was going to stay exactly as he was wearing exactly what he was wearing, saying only what needed to be said, and he was going to wait for the truth to arrive on its own schedule. It was 8 minutes away. Diane Hartley had been the front desk manager of the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal for 6 years, and in that time she had built the role into something that felt to her like a calling. She was 51 years old. Her blonde hair was cut to the jaw and set each morning with enough product to survive a transatlantic flight at altitude. Her uniform, navy blazer, white shirt, gold name tag, was pressed to a precision that made it look less like a work outfit and more like a declaration. She had worked in aviation hospitality for 22 years, moving through 3 FBO networks and 2 regional airlines before landing at Pinnacle, and she carried those years the way some people carry credentials, visibly proudly as proof of something earned. She knew her regulars the way a longtime bartender knows theirs. There was Mr. Fontaine, the hedge fund manager from Greenwich, who always flew out on Thursday evenings and always wanted an oat milk flat white ready before he cleared the security checkpoint. There was the retired rock musician. She never used his first name because he had once told her he found it intrusive, who flew twice a year to his place in the south of France and always brought the ground crew individually wrapped chocolates from a shop in the West Village. There was the real estate developer who flew his entire extended family to Aspen every Christmas on a Challenger 650, and always, without exception, overtipped every single member of the terminal staff. These were her people. She knew their aircraft tail numbers. She knew their pilots by voice. She knew which ones needed privacy and which ones needed attention, and she moved between those needs with the instinctive grace of someone who had made herself indispensable by knowing exactly what was required before it was asked for. She took her role as gatekeeper seriously. That was how she thought of it. Gatekeeping. And she did not attach any negative meaning to the word. The terminal was exclusive. Exclusive meant it was not for everyone. Her job was to maintain that exclusivity with a smile and a firm hand, and she did it well. She had called security 14 times in 6 years. She did not think about that number. If she had thought about it, if she had laid out those 14 incidents side by side and examined them, she might have noticed something. 11 of those 14 calls had involved men of color. But Diane Hartley had never done that accounting. She had a story, she told herself, about each individual incident, a story about protocol and standards and the integrity of the terminal's client experience, and the stories were individually coherent enough that she had never felt the need to look at them all together. She did not think of herself as a prejudiced person. This was the most important thing to understand about Diane. She was not performing cruelty. She was not conscious of the pattern in her behavior. She had simply never been placed in a situation that forced her to see it clearly. She had worked in environments that rewarded her instincts, without questioning them, managed by people who shared her assumptions, serving a clientele whose appearance tended to confirm her notions of who belonged. She had been insulated professionally and personally from the consequences of her own blind spots for so long that they had calcified into certainty. On this particular Tuesday evening, before Marcus Ellison walked through the door, Diane had been in an excellent mood. The terminal was running smoothly. The fireplace was going. The catering on the evening's charter departures had been loaded on schedule, and currently leaning against the front desk with the relaxed entitlement of a man who has never once doubted his place in a room was Richard Ackman. Richard was 47, white, a vice president at a regional investment advisory firm called Ackman Advisors that reported to Callaway Capital. He was flying out on a chartered Phenom 300 to Boston tonight, a short hop, a quick turnaround for a client dinner. The Phenom was a perfectly respectable light jet, a solid machine that seated 8 and traveled at close to 500 miles per hour. Richard spoke about it as though he had personally designed it. "I simply cannot understand," Richard was saying, swirling his complimentary sparkling water, "why the catering brief is not confirmed at least 2 hours prior. When I pay for a premium charter experience, the chilled sparkling wine should be loaded and waiting, not playing catch-up while I'm standing here in a wet topcoat. Mr. Ackman, I completely understand, and I do apologize," Diane said, her voice carrying the particular frequency of professional sympathy she had spent years perfecting. "The catering company had a delay because of the weather system. I have already spoken to the ground supervisor, and I can confirm your aircraft will be fully catered before boarding. I will make sure a credit is noted on your account." Richard nodded in the manner of a man accepting what is owed to him. Good. That is how it should work. He adjusted his tie and reached for his water again. And that was when the heavy glass doors opened and a man in a faded navy hoodie walked in from the rain. Diane's eyes moved to the entrance the way they always did, automatic reflexive cataloging. She took in the hoodie, the jeans, the scuffed white sneakers, the backpack that had clearly seen years of use, the rain on the fabric, the absence of anything she recognized as the visual vocabulary of this terminal's clientele, and something in her face closed. It did not close all the way. Diane Hartley's face never closed all the way. She had been in hospitality too long for that. But there was a shift, a subtle dropping of temperature behind the eyes, a narrowing of the particular warmth she had been offering Richard Ackman for the past 10 minutes. The calculus was instantaneous. She was not aware of performing it. It happened the way breathing happens, below the level of conscious thought governed by patterns laid down over years. She stepped out from behind the desk, and she said the words she had said before in one form or another more times than she had ever thought to count. Marcus let her finish. He waited until she had said everything she intended to say, the part about the service entrance, the part about drivers and couriers, the part about needing him to leave before this became unpleasant. He waited through all of it without interrupting, without reacting, his backpack still on his shoulder, his hands loose at his sides. Then he said simply, "I am not a driver. I am a passenger. I am here to check in and wait for my flight." Diane looked at him with the expression of a person who has just heard something they consider implausible. Not impossible. She was a professional, and professionals maintained composure, but implausible. Something slightly off, like a note, played a half step from where it was supposed to land. I know every broker charter client and corporate arrival that passes through this terminal, she said, her voice still carrying that same practiced authority. I have never seen you in my life. Now I have asked you once, and I am asking again. Please, leave. My name is Marcus Ellison, Marcus said. If you check the arrivals manifest for this evening, you will find my departure listed. Diane's expression did not change. She moved back behind the desk with the deliberate movement of someone executing a protocol, clicked her mouse, and scrolled down the screen with one manicured finger. Her voice took on a performative quality, as though she were reading something aloud for an audience. I have a NetJets positioning flight to Aspen. I have Mr. Ackman's Phenom 300 to Boston. She paused. I have a VistaJet Challenger to Miami. There is no charter booked under the name Ellison. It is not a charter, Marcus said. It is a privately registered aircraft. Diane looked up from the screen. Something moved in her expression. Not belief, but a harder, more deliberate version of disbelief. The kind that comes when a person has already decided the answer and is reconfiguring the evidence to fit. From the bar stool, Richard Ackman turned around fully for the first time. He looked Marcus up and down, and the corners of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile. I can pull up the registration if that is helpful, Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket. Diane took a sharp step back. Do not do that, she said. Her voice dropped suddenly, not in volume but in temperature. Keep your hands where I can see them. Marcus went still. He had his hand partway into his pocket. He stopped. He looked at Diane. He looked at the distance between them. 6 feet of marble floor, a mahogany desk, and 2 decades of accumulated assumptions. Then very slowly he withdrew his hand. Empty. He held it up, palm outward, fingers spread. I was reaching for my phone, he said. To pull up the aircraft registration. I do not need to see the registration, Diane said. Her voice had found its footing again, the professional frequency restored. But there was something underneath it now, a tightness. I need you to leave. Across the lounge, a woman had set down her magazine. Near the window, a young woman in her late 20s, with a green tea cooling on the table in front of her, had gone very still. Her name was Sophia Reyes. She was a travel content creator with 820,000 followers on her primary platform, and she had been in this terminal for 40 minutes waiting for a late departure to Miami. She had been intending to record a short aesthetic video, the fireplace, the warm light, the rain against the glass, something calm and beautiful for her audience. She was no longer thinking about that video. She was watching Diane Hartley. She was watching the man in the navy hoodie. She was watching the distance between them and the particular quality of that distance, and something she recognized in the way his hand had moved and the way she had responded to it, and she was sitting very quietly and paying very close attention. She did not reach for her phone. Not yet. Ma'am, Marcus said, reading the gold name tag on Diane's blazer. Diane, I understand you do not recognize me. I am not asking you to take my word for anything. I am asking you to check the manifest. My aircraft is inbound. It is registered to Ellison Global Systems, LLC. The tail number is N-MELL-1. It will appear in your operations system under that registration. I am simply asking you to look. Diane looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to her screen. And she typed. The search took 4 seconds. Whatever came back on that screen, her expression did not change. She closed the window. She looked up. I do not have anything under that registration for this evening, she said. I am going to need you to step outside. Marcus looked at her steadily. He had been lied to before. He recognized it. Not with outrage, not with the hot flush of immediate anger, but with the specific weariness of a person who has been lied to in exactly this way many times and has learned to carry that weight without letting it bend them. "I am not going to do that," he said. Richard Ackman set down his sparkling water. He stood up from the bar stool, smoothing his tie, and walked a few steps toward the center of the room with the ease of a man who has never once questioned his right to take up space. He spoke in the manner of someone offering advice to a person too stubborn to accept obvious help. "Look, friend, I do not know what kind of mix-up brought you in here tonight, but the lady has been very patient with you. The respectful thing to do is take the hint head back outside and sort out whatever confusion you have got going on from the correct channels. The people in this lounge have flights to catch." Marcus turned and looked at Richard directly. "I am not confused, and I am not your friend." Richard blinked. He had not expected that. He had expected, what, defensiveness, probably. Apology, maybe. The flustered retreat of a man who has been firmly put in his place by someone with the authority to do so. He had not expected stillness. He had not expected the quiet, complete absence of any desire to perform for him. It made Richard Ackman deeply, irrationally uncomfortable. He turned back to Diane, recalibrating. "Does this terminal not have a perimeter verification process? I have to say, this is becoming a pattern." He dropped his voice on the last part, slightly, but not enough for it to actually be quiet. Marcus watched him and said nothing. Sophia Reyes's hand moved to her phone. She did not pick it up. She rested her fingers on the edge of it and waited. Diane had straightened herself behind the desk with the posture of a woman who has just received confirmation that she was right all along. Richard's intervention had done exactly what a certain kind of intervention is designed to do. It had redistributed the weight in the room. Now it was 2-against-1 authority against intrusion, and Diane felt the ground solidify beneath her. "Sir," she said to Marcus, her voice taking on the finality of someone closing a chapter, "I have asked you multiple times to leave this facility. You have refused. I am giving you one final opportunity to do so voluntarily, or I will be required to call security." Marcus looked at her. Then he looked out at the rain-dark tarmac through the glass wall behind her. Then he looked back. "Then call them," he said. And he walked to the glass wall and stood with his back to the room, looking out at the empty parking spot closest to the window, and he waited. He had made a decision, and the decision was this. He was not going to prove a single thing. He was not going to perform. He was not going to pull out the acquisition documents from his backpack or dial his pilot or name-drop the 17 board positions he held. He had tried those things before in other rooms with other Dianes, and what he had learned was that the proof was never really what those rooms wanted. Those rooms wanted departure. They wanted the discomfort of his presence to resolve itself by him walking back out the door. He was not going to do that. He was going to stand at this window until his aircraft arrived. And when it did, it would say everything he had not said, more clearly and more completely than anything he could have spoken. 7 minutes now. Richard Ackman had built his professional life around a very specific skill, reading a room quickly and positioning himself on the winning side of it. He had done this in boardrooms and at client dinners and on golf courses and at the kind of private social events where the right word in the right ear could shift a deal by 10 points. He was not a bad man in the way that people who have never been seriously tested tend not to think of themselves as bad. He was a man who had spent 20 years learning how to signal belonging, how to wear it, project it, protect it, and who had come to mistake the performance for the thing itself. He was genuinely successful in a moderate way, vice president at a firm that managed several $100 million in assets, a reputation in his circuit, a good apartment in the 70s, a decent golf handicap, a roster of clients who liked him because he made them feel smart. He flew the chartered Phenom 4 times a year and mentioned it in contexts where it was not strictly necessary to mention it. He had been watching the scene at the front desk with the growing discomfort of a man who has involved himself in something and is now waiting for it to resolve in the direction he assumed it would. But the man in the navy hoodie was not resolving. He was standing at the glass wall with his back to the room, still and quiet, and that stillness was beginning to do something to the atmosphere of the lounge that Richard did not appreciate. Stillness in Richard's experience was a posture of power. Stillness said, "I am not afraid of this moment." Stillness said, "I have time." Stillness said, "The outcome of this situation does not threaten me." Men who were in the wrong in Richard's experience did not stand still. They fidgeted. They made phone calls. They got loud or got small. They did not simply turn their back on the room and look out at the rain. It bothered him. He picked up his sparkling water, put it down again, and then said to Diane loudly enough for it to count as a contribution to the room, "You know, if he were actually a passenger here, he would have said something that verified it by now. Charter clients have documentation. They have crew contacts. They do not just stand there." He gestured vaguely toward the glass wall. "That is a privately registered aircraft," Diane said in a tone that communicated precisely what she thought of that claim. Richard let out a short, dry sound that was not quite a laugh. "Right. Right." He nodded slowly, the way people do when they are performing the act of processing something charitable and finding it not worth the effort. He turned on his stool to look at Marcus's back. "Look," he said, and his voice had shifted into something he probably thought of as reasonable, but which carried underneath it the particular flavor of condescension that comes from a man who has never been told he does not belong anywhere. "I will be straight with you. I do not know what brought you in here tonight. Maybe you got turned around. Maybe somebody told you this was the right terminal. Maybe there is some kind of mix-up going on with a booking somewhere. These things happen." He paused. "But the way to handle that is not to dig in. The way to handle it is to step outside, make a call, get it sorted. That is how it works." Marcus did not turn around. Richard's jaw tightened just slightly. He looked at Diane. She gave the smallest, most professional of nods, which he read as solidarity. "Some of us have flights to catch." Richard continued louder now. "Some of us have been waiting here in good faith, and frankly, this situation is making everyone uncomfortable." He glanced around the lounge, at the couple near the fireplace who had gone carefully neutral, at the man with the Financial Times who had not turned a page in 4 minutes, at Sophia Reyes near the window who was looking at her phone. "You might want to ask her to put that away," Richard said to Diane, dropping his voice only partially. "Last thing this terminal needs is someone posting something out of context." Diane hesitated. She looked at Sophia. Sophia looked up from her phone, and without any particular aggression, she turned the phone's camera lens toward Diane. Diane stopped walking. The dynamic had shifted in a way she could not immediately process. The phone was simply a phone, a small rectangle in the hands of a young woman near the window. It should not have changed anything. But it changed everything in the way that documentation always changes everything, because suddenly the room was not just experienced. It was recorded. And recorded rooms have a different kind of gravity. Diane returned to her desk. Richard turned back to his water with the expression of a man who has submitted a motion and is waiting for it to be voted on. Near the window, Sophia was not yet live streaming. She was thinking. She was thinking about her uncle, who was named Roberto, who had managed a property portfolio in Miami for 15 years. She was thinking about the Tuesday morning 4 years ago, when a hotel manager had escorted him out of a lobby in Brickell while he was there to conduct a property inspection because his jeans and his work boots did not communicate what he was there to do. She was thinking about the look on her uncle's face when he told her that story. Not angry, just tired in the way that people get tired of something that has happened too many times to fully sustain the energy of outrage. She looked at the man in the navy hoodie standing at the glass wall. He had not moved. He had not turned around once. His backpack sat slightly lower on one shoulder, now the weight of it shifting the fabric of his hoodie. His left hand was loose at his side. He was simply watching the tarmac. She looked down at her phone. She pressed record. Richard Ackman said one more thing, and it was the thing that would cost him everything. Not whispered, not hedged, but offered to the room with the comfortable casualness of a man who has always found rooms like this agreeable. I will be honest, I would love to see security sort this out properly, whatever that takes. Sophia held the phone steady. The scuffed backpack Marcus was carrying, had anyone thought to look inside, it contained a titanium laptop, 2 encrypted phones, a leather portfolio, and a signed term sheet from an acquisition that had closed at 9 o'clock that morning. The acquisition that now included the mahogany desk and the amber lighting and the real wood in the fireplace and the square of marble floor that Richard Ackman was standing on. Diane Hartley picked up her radio. She held it with the practiced grip of someone who had done this before, who knew the weight of it and the protocol that followed and the particular feeling of reassurance that came from holding a device that could summon help. She pressed the button. Unit 3 to the front desk. Code Amber. Unauthorized individual refusing to vacate the premises. The radio crackled. A voice responded. Copy. En route. Richard Ackman settled back onto his bar stool with the air of a man who has placed a correct bet and is now waiting for the result. He lifted his sparkling water and took a slow, deliberate sip. Marcus did not turn around. He was still standing at the glass wall, and from behind, he looked like a man who had all the time in the world. His shoulders were level. His breathing, as far as anyone could observe it, was unchanged. He had the posture of someone who has decided something and does not need to keep deciding it. 60 seconds passed. The door from the staff corridor opened, and Officer Carlos Vega entered the lounge. Vega was 34, solidly built, a buzz cut above a wide, serious face. He had been in security for 9 years, the last 4 at this terminal. He wore his uniform well and carried his utility belt with the ease of someone who has made peace with the weight of it. He was not a violent person, and he was not a cruel one. He was a man who had been trained in a specific way to read specific situations, and he had not yet been trained to question the accuracy of that reading. He came through the door and took in the room in a single sweep, the polished, composed white woman behind the desk, her arms tightly crossed. The man on the bar stool in the sharp suit turned half toward the scene with an expression of confident expectation, and the casually dressed black man standing at the glass wall with his back to the room. Vega moved toward the center of the lounge and positioned himself between Marcus and the desk. He did not do this consciously. It was where his training pointed him. What is the situation? Diane's voice shifted into the slightly trembling register of someone who is performing distress while maintaining control. She had used this register before. It was effective. This individual entered without authorization and has repeatedly refused to leave. He also, she paused for barely a beat, became threatening when I asked him to show identification. Marcus turned around. Not quickly, not dramatically. He simply turned the way a person turns when something requires their attention. His expression was the same as it had been since he walked through the door. Calm, clear, tired in the way that comes from 3 days without adequate sleep rather than from anything happening in this room. I did not threaten anyone, Marcus said. His voice was measured and direct, projected to reach the whole room without being raised. I have not threatened anyone at any point since I walked through that door. I offered to show identification and was refused. I asked to have my aircraft registration checked and was told it was not in the system, which is not accurate. I am a passenger. My aircraft is inbound to this terminal. Vega looked at him, then at Diane, then back at Marcus. Sir, I am going to need you to step outside with me. I am not trespassing, Marcus said. I have a registered aircraft arriving at this terminal. My name is listed under that registration. I have every right to be in this building. That is something we can sort out outside, Vega said. His tone was not aggressive. It was final. Marcus looked at him steadily. Sorting it out outside means leaving the building. I am not going to do that. Vega took one step forward. The distance between them compressed. When Vega spoke again, his voice had dropped. Not menacing, but quiet, in the way that carries more weight than loudness. Sir, I am not going to repeat this. You can walk out on your own, or I can call Port Authority, and this becomes something significantly more complicated for everyone involved. That is the choice. What is it going to be? From his bar stool, Richard Ackman said quietly enough to suggest he was talking to himself, but not quietly enough for it to actually be private. Finally, Marcus heard it. He looked at Richard. Richard did not meet his eyes. He looked back at his water. Marcus looked at Vega. He looked at Diane, who was standing behind her desk with her hands folded in front of her and her eyes sharp with the specific satisfaction of a person who has watched a situation resolve in the direction they intended. She had the expression of someone who has correctly identified a problem and correctly applied the protocol and is now watching the machinery of consequence do its work. He looked at all of it. And something happened in Marcus's chest that he had spent 20 years learning to govern. Not anger, or not only anger, but something larger and older and more complicated than anger, the specific weight of a man who has done everything right and been treated as though he has done everything wrong, who has offered proof and been refused it, who has spoken clearly and been misquoted, who is standing in a building he owns and being told to leave it. He had a choice. He could reach into his backpack right now and pull out the acquisition documents. He could dial Tom Briggs and have him send a confirmation to Diane's operations screen in 30 seconds. He could call Captain Okafor and have him walk into this terminal right now and say his name in front of all of them. He did not do any of those things. He said, "All right," and he bent down and picked up his backpack. Vega relaxed slightly. Richard set down his water. Diane's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, and Marcus walked, not toward the street entrance, not toward the cold and the rain and the exit that Diane had been pointing him toward since the moment he walked in, but toward the glass wall. He stopped in front of it. His back was to the room. He set his backpack down at his feet and looked out at the tarmac. "Hey," Vega said, the relaxation evaporating. "The exit is that way." "I know where it is," Marcus said without turning around. "I am waiting for my aircraft." "Sir?" "My aircraft is approximately 7 minutes out," Marcus said. He said it the way you state a fact about weather, calmly, without investment in whether the other person believes it. "I'm going to stand here until it arrives. You are welcome to stand here with me." Vega looked at Diane. Diane looked at Marcus's back. She looked at the empty parking spot outside the glass, the VIP spot closest to the window, the one reserved for the heaviest and most significant arrivals of the evening. She looked at it and saw what she always saw, an empty space, brightly lit, waiting. She reached for her radio again, but something stopped her hand. Something she could not quite name. A thin thread of unease, a first crack in the certainty she had been operating from. She did not examine it. She put the radio down and told herself it was nothing. Sophia Reyes, near the window, zoomed in slightly on the empty parking spot. Then she zoomed out to frame Marcus's silhouette against the glass. She posted a single still image with a caption that read, "He told them he was waiting for his plane. They called security. Keep watching." Within 4 minutes, it had been liked 3,400 times. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room you earned your right to be, in a room you built toward, worked toward, sacrificed for, and still been handed the message clearly without words that you did not belong? Have you ever stood in a place that was yours by every legitimate measure and felt the weight of someone else's assumption pressed down on you like a physical thing? Drop your city in the comments right now. Tell us where you are watching from. This community spans every corner of this country and beyond, and I want to know who is with us tonight. And if this story is already hitting something true, hit that subscribe button right now, because what is about to come through that glass wall is something none of these people in this terminal will ever forget for the rest of their lives. Now, back to Marcus. He was standing at the glass wall, and the jazz was still playing, and the fireplace was still burning, and the terminal was still warm and amber lit and carefully curated, and everything it was designed to be. And none of that was reaching him. He was thinking about the elevator. He was 24 years old in the memory. First-year associate at Meridian Consulting, 12-hour days, a studio apartment in Hoboken. He shared with a college friend because neither of them could afford it alone. He had been in the office on a Saturday when the senior partner, a man named Gerald Cross, silver-haired Yale tie, the kind of easy authority that comes with old money and reinforced assumptions, had stepped into the elevator beside him and said without looking at him directly, "Freight elevator is around the corner." It was said in the tone of someone being helpful, sharing information, doing a service. Marcus had not said anything. He had pressed his floor button, the 18th floor where he had been working since 7 that morning, and he had looked straight ahead and he had felt something happen to his chest that he did not have a word for yet because he was 24 and still learning the vocabulary of this particular kind of damage. He had a word for it now. It was accumulation. Not any single incident, but the weight of all of them laid on top of each other over years. The elevator, the hotel lobby. The time a parking attendant in Chicago had asked him to pull around to the service entrance. The time a flight attendant on a commercial flight had told him he was in the wrong seat. When he was not. The look in a real estate agent's eyes when he had walked into an open house for a $12 million property in Georgetown, and she had assumed he was there about the landscaping. He had learned to navigate accumulation in the way that you navigate any weight you cannot put down, by adjusting his posture, distributing it differently, finding the angle that makes it most bearable. He had learned to smile faster and speak more clearly and lead with the credential rather than make people work to arrive at it. He had learned all of the accommodations. And then, somewhere in his mid-30s, something had begun to shift. Not an explosion. Not a confrontation. Just a slow, quiet recalibration. The kind that happens when you have spent enough time being successful in rooms that tried to refuse you entry that you begin to understand something about those rooms. They were not assessing him. They were assessing their own limitations. Their assumptions said nothing about who he was. They said everything about what those rooms had never been forced to expand to contain. He was not going to leave this terminal. He was not going to prove himself to Diane Hartley or to Richard Ackman or to Officer Vega. He was not going to pull out a document or dial a number or name a valuation. He had tried all of that in other rooms, and what he had learned was that in the rooms where proof was met with refusal, the proof was never the point. The point was departure. And he was not going to depart. He was going to stand here exactly as he was wearing what he was wearing, and he was going to let the truth arrive in its own form and its own time. In his peripheral vision, he could see the faint reflection of the lounge in the glass in front of him. The fireplace, the bar, Sophia's silhouette at the window table, her phone in her hand. He did not acknowledge her. But something in him registered her presence and the particular meaning of a phone held steady in a quiet room, and he felt for the first time since walking through the door something that was not quite peace but was adjacent to it. He was not alone with this. The truth was being documented. He exhaled slowly. Outside, through the rain, somewhere on the edge of the taxiway, the lights of something very large were beginning to move. Sophia Reyes had not planned to be in this terminal tonight. She had been booked on an earlier departure to Miami, a direct commercial flight out of Newark, but weather delays had cascaded through the afternoon, and a contact in the aviation industry had arranged a last-minute seat on a charter positioning flight out of Teterboro. She had never been to the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal before. She had arrived with a camera bag and a half-formed idea about filming something calm and cinematic for her audience. The fireplace, the rain, the amber light, the kind of content that made people feel like they were briefly inhabiting a life they did not have. She had been here for 40 minutes when Marcus walked through the door. Sophia had 820,000 followers across platforms, and she had built that audience slowly over 6 years with a particular kind of honesty. She did not glamorize travel. She showed the beautiful parts, and she showed the ugly parts, and she had learned that the ugly parts were often the ones that her audience held on to longest, because the ugly parts were the ones that reflected something they recognized. She recognized what was happening at the front desk. She did not perform recognition. She did not gasp or stand up or raise her phone dramatically. She simply became very still the way she did when she was watching something that required her full attention, and she assessed what she was seeing with the clear eyes of a person who has been paying this kind of attention for a long time. She thought about her uncle Roberto. She thought about the Tuesday morning in Miami, the hotel lobby, the manager in his crisp uniform who had taken one look at Roberto's work jeans and his boots with the dried grout on them, and had made a decision that took no information into account except what Roberto looked like. Roberto had managed that property for 3 years. He knew every corner of that building. He had been escorted out of its lobby like a stranger. He had told Sophia the story with the specific flat tiredness of someone reporting a fact rather than narrating an injury. He had laughed slightly at the end. The laugh that means, what else would you do? Sophia set down her green tea. She pressed record. She was not live streaming. This was a deliberate choice. Live streaming invited spectacle, invited commentary, invited the kind of real-time noise that could cloud the clarity of what she was capturing. She wanted the footage clean. She wanted it to stand on its own without her narration layered over it so that anyone who watched it would see exactly what she saw. A man standing at a wall, quiet and still. A woman behind a desk with crossed arms and a particular expression. The distance between them and what that distance contained. She captured Marcus at the window, his backpack at his feet, the rain behind him. She captured Diane returning to her desk after the radio call, the small straightening of her posture, the satisfaction she was not quite successfully concealing. She captured Richard Ackman on his bar stool, the tilt of his chin when he made his comments, the way he turned back to his water after each one with the ease of a man who considers the matter handled. She captured Officer Vega entering the room, the positioning, the particular angle from which he read the scene and drew his conclusions. She posted the still frame Marcus's silhouette against the rain-dark glass, the floodlit, empty parking spot behind him, the whole composition carrying something she could not have scripted, a dignity so visible it read as accusation. Caption. He told them he was waiting for his plane. They called security. Keep watching. Within 4 minutes, 3,400 likes. Within 7, the comments were moving faster than she could read them. A woman in Atlanta writing, "This happened to my father in a hospital waiting room. He was the attending physician." A man in London writing, "The stillness. That is what gets me." He knew. A teenager in Oakland writing, "Why does he have to be that calm just to exist?" Sophia read the comments as they came in, and she felt something she recognized as grief, and something else she recognized as purpose, and she kept the phone steady. Richard Ackman noticed. "You might want to ask her to put that away," he said to Diane low, but not low enough. "Last thing any of us needs is something going viral out of context." Diane began walking toward Sophia's table. Sophia turned the lens toward Diane, calmly without a word. Diane stopped. She stood in the middle of the lounge for a moment recalibrating and then walked back to her desk. The power of the phone was not in the threat of anything. It was simply in the fact of it. The knowledge that this room was no longer private, that what happened here had a witness, that the documentation existed and could not be undocumented. Diane picked up her radio. Then she looked out the glass wall, and the sound arrived before the image did. It started in the floor. Not a sound exactly. Not yet. A vibration, deep and building, moving through the marble like a slow tide coming in. The coffee cups on the bar trembled. The surface of Richard Ackman's sparkling water shivered in concentric rings, a detail he did not notice because he was already turning toward the glass wall. Then the sound caught up to the vibration, and it was immense. Not the sound of the Phenom 300 that Richard was flying to Boston with its clean, polite turbofan whine. Not the sound of the NetJet's positioning flight that had departed an hour ago. This was something in a different category entirely. A deep, resonant roar that dropped in frequency and mass as the aircraft spooled back from approach power, filling the terminal, the way water fills a space from the floor, up and the walls in. The jazz on the ceiling speakers became completely inaudible. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, the lights appeared first. They emerged from the dark and rain on the taxiway in the far distance. The bright white of landing lights, the green and red of navigation lights, and behind them the massive dark shape that the lights were attached to, moving with the slow, absolute confidence of something that does not need to hurry, because its size has already settled every question about priority. It was a Gulfstream G700, the largest, most advanced private jet in production. It seated 19 and had a range that could carry a passenger from New York to Singapore without stopping. Its cabin was longer than the average American family's home. Its engines made a sound at low power that was less like the sound of a machine and more like the sound of weather. The fuselage was painted in obsidian black, a deep, total black that in the rain and the floodlights did not look like a paint color, but like an absence of light, like something cut out of the night sky. Running from nose to tail was a single stripe in champagne gold, no wider than a handspan, precise and deliberate and entirely without need for further decoration. Richard Ackman stood up from his bar stool. He did not do it consciously. His body simply registered what his eyes were seeing and responded with the involuntary tribute of a man who has organized his entire value system around the worship of this specific category of object. He stood up, and his sparkling water sat forgotten on the bar, and he said to no one, "Whose is that?" It was not a question. It was the sound of a man's certainties beginning to reorganize themselves. The G700 did not taxi toward the standard rows where the Phenom and the Challenger were parked. The ground crew, two figures in yellow rain gear with illuminated wands moving through the downpour with the focused efficiency of people who know exactly where this aircraft is going, guided it in a wide, deliberate arc toward the VIP parking position. The position closest to the terminal. The position directly in front of the glass wall. Directly in front of Marcus. The jet turned. The immense black fuselage filled the window. The floodlights hit the gold stripe and it burned clean and steady against the dark. The engines spooling to idle produced a sound like a held breath, like something vast and patient, releasing tension it had been carrying at altitude for hours. The aircraft came to a stop. The tail was perfectly centered in the window, and on the tail in the same champagne gold catching the light, NMELL1. Diane Hartley was standing behind her desk with both hands flat on the surface. She was looking at the registration number. She was not moving. Richard had both hands on the edge of the bar. The knuckles on his right hand were visibly white. Officer Vega had taken 2 slow steps backward, not from Marcus, not toward anywhere specific, just backward, the way a person steps back when the ground shifts and they need to find their balance. Marcus had not moved. He was still standing at the glass, his backpack at his feet, looking at his aircraft, the way you look at something you are glad to see, quietly, without performance, with the simple recognition of arrival. The couple near the fireplace, who had been maintaining careful neutrality for the past 20 minutes, were no longer pretending to do anything else. The man with the Financial Times had set it on his knee unread. Sophia was still recording. Diane's hands moved to her keyboard. She typed the tail number. She pressed enter. The screen populated. Owner Ellison Global Systems, LLC. Registered operator Marcus A. Ellison. Aircraft type Gulfstream G700. Estimated value $72 million. She read it once. She read it again. The color did not leave her face all at once. It went the way light goes at the end of a short day in winter, gradually from the edges, first leaving something pale and very still at the center. Operations did not. She started and stopped. The sentence had nowhere useful to go. Richard Ackman's mouth was slightly open. He was staring at the tail number visible through the glass. He was doing the math. The estimated cost of the airframe, the operating budget required to maintain a flight department of this scale, the net worth implied by ownership of a G700 rather than use of a G700. And the math was arriving at a number that was making his earlier comments play back in his memory in a way that was deeply physically unpleasant. He owned the plane. Richard had said those words himself an hour ago in the tone of someone dismissing an obvious lie. He said it, out loud, in a room with witnesses and at least one recording device. The main cabin door of the G700 unfolded. It opened from the fuselage with a hydraulic ease, becoming stairs in a single smooth motion, the interior lighting of the cabin spilling out into the rain-wet night. At the top of the stairs a figure appeared. White uniform shirt, 4 gold stripes on the epaulets, silver-streaked hair damp at the temples from the weather. He was carrying a large black umbrella, and he did not look at the rain or the floodlights or the terminal window. He looked straight ahead, and he began to walk down the stairs. Captain James Okafor had been flying for 31 years. He had his ATP certificate at 26, his type rating on the Gulfstream series at 30, and his first captain's seat at 33 on a mid-sized business jet for a pharmaceutical company in Houston. He had flown through thunderstorms over the Rockies and fog over Heathrow and crosswinds in Oslo that had made younger first officers go very quiet in the right seat. He had 22,000 flight hours and the kind of unhurried precision in the cockpit that takes decades to build and cannot be performed by anyone who does not actually have it. He had been flying for Marcus Ellison for 9 years. In that time, he had come to understand his employer the way a careful and intelligent person comes to understand someone they spend significant time with, not through what was said, but through what was not. Marcus Ellison was a man who did not waste words. He asked clear questions and expected clear answers. He treated the flight crew with the specific consideration of someone who understands that the people responsible for his life at 43,000 feet deserve something more than courtesy. They deserve genuine respect. He knew their families' names. He acknowledged birthdays. When turbulence was significant, he came forward and said sincerely that he appreciated the crew's skill. He was in Captain Okafor's experience of men who had achieved what Marcus Ellison had achieved exceptionally uncommon. Okafor had known when they taxied into the Pinnacle terminal that something was wrong. He had not seen it directly. He had seen the ground crew's posture as they guided the aircraft in. The slight distraction, the glance toward the terminal window. The quality of attention that looks like attention to something else. He had noticed the cluster of staff visible through the glass. He had felt with the instincts of a man who reads environments for a living that the atmosphere on the ramp was carrying something it did not normally carry. He did not know what had happened. He did not need to know. He knew his job. He took the large black umbrella from the forward galley, nodded to Elena Torres, his flight attendant, who was watching the terminal window with an expression that said she had already formed a clear opinion of the situation, and he descended the air stairs. The rain was heavy and cold. His dress uniform shoes hit the wet tarmac, and he walked without hurrying, without looking toward the terminal window where he knew people were watching. He walked the way he had always walked, with the unhurried certainty of a man who has made his peace with the ground and is most fully himself at altitude, but who carries that altitude with him wherever he goes. He reached the glass door. He pulled it open. The warmth of the terminal came out to meet the cold of the November rain, and Captain Okafor stepped through the threshold and into the Pinnacle Aviation Lounge. And for the first time since he had entered the room, every person in it was completely, absolutely still. He did not look at Diane Hartley. He did not look at Richard Ackman or Officer Vega or the couple by the fireplace. He did not look at the front desk or the coffee bar or the fireplace or any of the careful, expensive architecture of the room. He looked at one person, the man in the navy hoodie standing at the glass wall with a backpack at his feet, and he walked toward him with the smooth directness of a man who has identified his destination and has no interest in anything that is not it. He stopped beside Marcus. He raised the umbrella, though they were inside, in a gesture that was not about rain. It was about something else entirely, about the visible witnessed act of service rendered to a specific person in a specific room in front of specific witnesses. And then Captain James Okafor spoke. His voice was not loud. It was the voice of a man who has given thousands of announcements in aircraft cabins, trained to carry, clearly trained to convey calm, trained to make the person receiving the information feel that everything is managed and everything is fine. He pitched it to reach the corners of the room. "Good evening, Mr. Ellison. My apologies for the slight delay. Air traffic control held us over Newark for 22 minutes due to the weather system moving through. The cabin is prepared. We are at your preferred temperature, and Elena has dinner ready whenever you would like to depart. We have a direct routing to London already cleared." The silence that followed was the deepest silence the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal had experienced in 6 years. Richard Ackman was still standing. His sparkling water was on the bar. He had not touched it since the jet appeared at the window. He was looking at the pilot in the crisp white uniform, and then at the man in the faded navy hoodie, and then at the pilot again. And the recycling of that gaze was the expression of a man watching the architecture of his assumptions collapse in slow motion. Diane Hartley's hand was flat on the desk. She had not moved since the pilot walked in. She was looking at Captain Okafor, at the 4 gold stripes, at the quiet authority in his posture, at the way he spoke the name Marcus Ellison, with the practiced natural ease of someone who has spoken that name thousands of times, who knows that name the way he knows his aircraft's registration, by heart, without consulting anything. She was not yet thinking about the acquisition. She did not yet know about that. What she was thinking was something simpler and more devastating. She had looked at the man in the navy hoodie, and she had seen a courier, and the man in the crisp uniform with the 4 gold stripes and the umbrella had looked at the same man and seen his employer. And she was beginning to understand with a clarity she could not escape which of them had seen correctly. Officer Vega stood near the staff door. His hand had dropped completely from his radio. He was looking at the floor with the expression of a man reviewing a recent decision and finding it irretrievably wrong. Sophia Reyes had not lowered her phone. Marcus looked at Captain Okafor. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. Brief private, the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for a particular moment and is now simply glad it has arrived. "Thank you, James," he said quietly. "Give me just a moment." He bent down and picked up his backpack. He turned around and faced the room. He looked at Diane. He looked at Richard. He looked at Vega. He let his gaze move across each of them without anger, without triumph, with the particular quality of attention that belongs to a person who is about to speak clearly and wants everyone in the room to hear it. Then he reached into his backpack. He pulled out a slim black leather folder and set it on the mahogany desk. He did not throw it or drop it. He placed it precisely in the center of the desk's surface, and the sound it made, a clean, firm contact between leather and wood, was the quietest loud sound anyone in that room had ever heard. Diane looked at it without touching it. Marcus opened it himself. Inside was a single page on crisp white stock, bearing the Ellison Global Systems letterhead in clean dark type. Diane read the first line. Then she read it again. Then she stopped reading and simply stood there, looking at the page, because the act of continuing to read it required accepting what it said, and accepting what it said required dismantling all at once every certainty she had been operating from for the past 30 minutes. Acquisition Completion Notice. Apex Aviation Holdings, including all subsidiary FBO operations and terminal facilities, effective 9:00 a.m. November 18th. Terminal Manager, Pinnacle Aviation, Teterboro. Diane Hartley. Employment status. Terminated with cause effective upon completion of executive walkthrough. Marcus let her read it. He did not rush her. He did not speak while she read. He gave her the specific mercy of silence, the space to understand what had happened before she had to respond to it. Then he spoke. Ellison Global Systems finalized the acquisition of Apex Aviation Holdings yesterday morning, he said. His voice was the same voice it had been all night, unhurried, level. The voice of a man who has not needed to raise it because everything he has needed to communicate has been communicated. This terminal, this desk, this lounge, the tarmac outside the leases, and the staff and the operations became part of my company at 9:00 this morning. I came in tonight dressed exactly as I am to conduct a quiet walkthrough to see how this terminal's staff treats people who walk through those doors when no one important is watching. He paused. You showed me everything I needed to see. Diane opened her mouth. What came out was not a sentence. It was the beginning of several sentences, fragments, each one reaching for solid ground and finding none. Operations, never. If I had known who you were. That Marcus said quietly is exactly the problem. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He stood where he was on the other side of the mahogany desk that had been between them all night, and he said what needed to be said with the clarity of a person who has been preparing it, not deliberately, not with calculation, but in the way that a person who has spent a lifetime in these rooms carries what they would say if they ever had the chance to say it properly. Your standard of basic human decency is entirely conditional on what someone appears to be worth. You did not want to see my identification, Diane. You refused it. You told me to keep my hands visible when I reached for my wallet. You lied to an armed security officer and told him I had been threatening. You did all of that because of what I was wearing and how I looked, and at no point did any other explanation for my presence in this building occur to you as worth entertaining. Diane's eyes were bright, not with tears, with the specific terrible alertness of a person who is hearing something accurate and has no prepared counter to it. I am not asking you to have known who I was. Marcus continued. I am asking you to understand why that should not matter. Whether I am the owner of this company or the man who delivers its mail, the correct response to my presence in this building is the same. It begins with a greeting. He turned to Officer Vega. Vega straightened slightly, the instinct of a man expecting a reprimand and preparing to receive it correctly. You walked into this room and positioned yourself between me and the desk before I had said a single word to you, Marcus said. You were acting on false information provided by your manager, and you accepted that information without question because the visual in front of you confirmed what you had already decided before you entered. That is not protocol. Protocol requires assessment. He held Vega's gaze. You will keep your position, but you will complete de-escalation and bias awareness training within 30 days. If that training is not completed, your employment ends. Are we clear? Yes, sir, Vega said. The words came out immediately without negotiation because there was nothing to negotiate. He had made an error, and the error had been named precisely, and the consequence was reasonable, and he knew it. He took 1 step back and 2 steps away from Diane, and that physical movement was its own kind of statement. If you believe that respect should not depend on what someone is wearing, that dignity does not need a credential to exist, subscribe to this channel right now and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because we are not done yet. Marcus turned to Richard Ackman. Richard had been standing next to the bar for the past 4 minutes in the arrested posture of a man who is attempting through absolute stillness to become unnoticeable. His garment bag was in his hand. He had been calculating silently and frantically the distance between himself and the boarding door. Richard. The name stopped him like a wall. He turned around slowly, the expression on his face, the particular arrangement of a man who has done something he knows was wrong and is hoping on the strength of nothing but hope that there will not be consequences, was one of the most legible expressions in the lounge. "You told me to walk back out into the rain," Marcus said. "You told the room I was running a scam. You said, and I want to be specific because the people in this room heard it, that you would love to see security sort this out. Whatever that takes." Richard's jaw moved. The weather, the flight, I was stressed, I did not." "Your firm is Ackman Advisors," Marcus said. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone without hurrying. "It operates under Callaway Capital. Arthur Callaway and I sit on the same private equity board. We speak every week." He looked at the phone, then put it away without dialing. "When I land in London tonight, Arthur and I have our regular call. I think this conversation is worth mentioning." Richard went white. Not pale. White. The specific absence of color that arrives when 15 years of career calculation reduces itself to a single moment's consequence. "Mr. Ellison, please. You have a flight to catch," Marcus said. "I suggest you board it." He dismissed Richard Ackman the way you close a door, completely without anger, without drama, simply by turning away. Richard was no longer in the room in the sense that mattered. Marcus looked at the lounge, at Sophia near the window with her phone still raised at the couple by the fireplace, who were no longer pretending not to watch, at the man with the Financial Times who had pressed it to his chest. He looked at all of them briefly, and then he spoke once more. "The first thing I will do as the owner of this terminal," he said to the room, to no one specifically, and to everyone specifically, is find a new manager. The only qualification I will be looking for is how they treat someone who walks through that door looking exactly the way I looked tonight." He picked up his backpack. He nodded once to Captain Okafor, and he walked to the tarmac door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the rain. The terminal was quiet after he left. Not the curated quiet of before, the jazz and the amber light and the careful atmosphere of exclusivity. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that settles after something has passed through a room and changed the temperature of it permanently. Officer Vega stood near the staff door. He did not look at Diane. He looked at the floor, and then at the glass wall, and then at the registration number still glowing on Diane's operations screen, NMELL1. Owner, Ellison Global Systems, LLC. Sophia Reyes, near the window, was reading comments on her phone. They were moving faster than she could process them. She had posted the full video now. The clip running from Marcus's stillness at the glass wall through Captain Okafor's entrance and Marcus's closing words at the threshold. And it was doing something she had only seen her content do a handful of times in 6 years. It was not just spreading. It was landing. People were not just watching it, they were holding on to it. Richard Ackman had gone through the boarding door without looking back. His Phenom 300 was fueled and ready, and its very smallness on the ramp, positioned near the G700 like a footnote beside a headline, was a visual that Sophia captured before she put the phone down. She posted that too. It did not require a caption. The couple by the fireplace left quietly nodding to no one in particular, and Diane Hartley stood behind her desk. She stood there for 4 minutes after Marcus walked out the tarmac door, looking at the black leather folder and its single page of Ellison Global Systems letterhead. She read the termination notice 3 more times. Each time she hoped it would resolve into something different. Each time it said the same thing. Then she reached for her radio, not to call security, not to summon anyone, but out of a reflex. Her hand closed around it and then opened again, and she set it back down. "Officer Vega said quietly from across the room, Diane, I can walk you out if you want." She looked at him. He was not unkind. He was not gloating. He was simply offering the only thing he could offer, which was a dignified exit from a room that had become uninhabitable for her. She reached behind the desk and took her coat from the hook where she hung it every morning when she arrived. She took her phone and her keys. She left her badge on the desk. She left her terminal keys. She did it silently because there was nothing to say that the black leather folder had not already said, and she was not yet capable of producing words in any case. Vega held the staff door open. She walked through it. The employee parking lot was cold and very wet, the floodlights catching the rain in long, bright columns. Diane sat in her car with the engine off for a long time. The inside of the car was dark, and through the windshield she could see the tail of the G700, its gold registration number still visible, its running lights still on. Captain Okafor was doing his post-departure checks. The engines had not yet come back to life. She made 3 calls. The first was to a man named Paul Gentry, a terminal manager at a competing FBO network who had been her mentor early in her career. She had known Paul for 17 years. She told him she had been terminated, and she told him the version of the story that her mind was still trying to construct. The version where she had been following protocol, where the situation had been genuinely ambiguous, where the new owner had been unreasonable in his response to an understandable error. Paul listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, there was a silence on the line that she did not know how to read. And then Paul said, Tom Briggs sent a memo to the regional network 3 hours ago. There is security footage attached. I have already watched it." She stopped talking. "The audio is very clear," Paul said. He was not cruel about it. He was simply accurate. "I cannot help you with this one. I am sorry." The call lasted 6 minutes. She sat with the dead phone in her hands and looked through the windshield at the rain. The second call was to her sister in Philadelphia. This one the night did not record. The window of the car was fogged by then, and from the outside there was only the car and the rain and the light inside, and Diane's sister's voice on the other end of the line saying, "Okay, I am listening. Tell me what happened." What Diane found she could not escape in the hour that followed was not the termination notice or the footage or the thought of Paul Gentry reading Tom Briggs's memo. What she could not escape was a single image, Captain James Okafor walking through the lounge with the black umbrella and 4 gold stripes and the full, simple authority of a man who knows exactly where he is going and exactly who he is going to, and never once looking at her. Not once. Not in acknowledgement, not in judgment, not in any kind of recognition at all. She had been the gatekeeper of that terminal for 6 years. She had logged every arrival. She had built her professional identity around being seen, being known, being the person that the important people recognized and turned to. And the pilot, crossing the room on his way to his employer, had not found her worth a single glance. That erasure sat heavier than the folder. By morning, Diane Hartley's name had been logged in the Apex Aviation personnel system with a cause notation that would follow her file wherever it went. Her unvested benefits were forfeited. Her end-of-year bonus was voided. The regional FBO community was small and well-connected, and Tom Briggs's memo had moved through it overnight like weather. She was not dramatic about it. She did not become a cautionary tale people told with relish. She became something quieter and more ordinary. A woman who had made a serious error in a room that happened to be on camera, who was now living with the weight of that, and who would be doing that living for a very long time. The rain was still coming down. The G700's engines came to life outside, that deep, resonant sound moving through the wet air like a physical thing. Diane watched through the fogged windshield as the running lights shifted and the massive black aircraft began its slow taxi toward the runway. She watched it until the lights disappeared into the rain. Then she started her car. The Phenom 300 lifted off from Teterboro 48 minutes after the G700. The weather had worsened in the interim, and the light jet moved through the cloud cover over northern New Jersey with the rattling, effortful quality of something working harder than it wanted to admit. Richard Ackman held the armrest and looked at the seat back in front of him and told himself in careful, measured internal sentences that he was going to be fine. He told himself Arthur Pendleton would not torch a career over a terminal exchange. He is a reasonable man. We have played golf. I have brought in 3 major clients in 4 years. One bad night in an FBO lounge is not a career event. He told himself the man was dressed like a delivery driver. Anyone would have. Anyone in that room, anyone in his position, given the same information, would have arrived at the same conclusion. He told himself Ellison probably will not even call. He is flying to London. He has a board meeting. He has an entire acquisition to manage. He is not going to spend political capital on a mid-level VP at a firm he does business with. He told himself all of this through New Jersey airspace and Connecticut airspace, and the first 40 minutes over Rhode Island, and then he could not sustain it anymore, because beneath all of it replaying with the persistence of something that will not be revised, was the look in Marcus Ellison's eyes when Richard had tried to dismiss him. And Marcus had simply looked back and said, "I am not your friend." That was all he had said. Not defensively, not victoriously. He had said it the way you acknowledge a fact about weather, simply without requiring anything in return. And in those words Richard had heard clearly, and without any possibility of mishearing what they actually meant, "I know exactly what is happening here. The only person who has been confused is you, and the confusion has been entirely about yourself." The Phenom landed in Boston. Richard kept his phone on airplane mode until the wheels touched the runway. Then habit won over anxiety and he turned it on. 14 notifications. He sat with the phone in his lap and looked at the lock screen, the way you look at something when you already know what it says, and you are waiting for the knowledge to become something other than what it is. He opened his email. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. Code of conduct violation. Please contact HR at your earliest convenience to arrange return of company property. He tried his corporate Slack. Access denied. He tried the firm's internal client portal. Deactivated. He had been cut off from Callaway Capital with the precision and speed of an organization that had made this decision before the plane landed, which meant Arthur Pendleton had made the call somewhere over Connecticut, which meant the 30-minute flight had not been enough distance. There was a text from his managing director sent 57 minutes ago. "Call me before you leave the aircraft." He did not call. There was a voicemail from Arthur Pendleton's executive assistant. Formal, professional, the kind of message that is carefully worded to be accurate and to leave no interpretive room. "Mr. Callaway wanted me to reach out and let you know that the Chicago meeting has been reassigned. He will be in touch directly regarding the administrative review, the merger meeting, the one he had been preparing for 3 months, the one that was supposed to define his year, possibly his next 2 years, the high watermark that he had been building toward since his last promotion. Reassigned." He found out who it had been reassigned to from the firm's internal newswire. The announcement was brief and written in the careful, neutral language of corporate communications, but Richard knew how to read between its lines, and what was between them was merciless. The meeting had been given to his direct subordinate, a woman named Vivian Mora, whom Richard had passed over for promotion twice in the last 4 years. The announcement noted without elaboration that Vivian had been leading the client relationship for the past 18 months. Richard sat with that for a long time. He descended the air stairs alone. The Boston evening was cold and raw harbor wind coming in from the east. He had no corporate car. The Callaway Capital account had been canceled. He found this out from the ground crew when the black SUV that was supposed to be waiting for him had received a cancellation notification 3 hours prior. He stood on the edge of the tarmac in his expensive suit that was starting to feel in the cold like something he was wearing for someone else, and he called a car on his personal phone. He waited. The Phenom was already being repositioned. The crew were professionals, and they were doing their jobs, and they did not look at him with any particular expression, and the absence of expression was its own kind of statement. The courtesy extended to a person who no longer represented anything, who was simply a man waiting for a ride. Richard was not a person who spent much time in reflection. His professional life had been built on momentum. Always forward, always toward the next thing. The next client, the next deal, the next room that confirmed what he needed rooms to confirm about himself. But standing on the tarmac in the cold with his garment bag over one shoulder and his personal credit card in his pocket with no meeting tomorrow morning and no corporate account and no return call to make because there was no version of the return call that helped him, he was still. Not by choice. By the simple fact that there was nowhere to move to. He thought about Marcus Ellison standing at the glass wall, the backpack at his feet, the unhurried stillness, the way he had not turned around when Richard spoke, and then had turned around when he chose to. Not when he was summoned, but when it was time. The way his voice had been the same throughout, not louder when challenged, not smaller when threatened, the same steady, clear register from the first exchange to the last. Richard had spent 20 years in rooms with powerful people. He had sat across the table from men worth 100 times what he was worth, and he had learned over that time to recognize the specific quality of genuine power, the thing underneath the suits and the credentials and the plane at the window. He had seen it tonight in the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal in a man in a faded navy hoodie and scuffed white sneakers. And he had decided in the span of one bad moment that he had the standing to judge it. His car arrived. He got in. He looked out the window as the car pulled away from the terminal, past the ramp, past the parked aircraft, past the controlled order of a world he had always imagined himself more central to than he actually was. He paid with his personal card. The G700 lifted off Teterborough's runway at 8:43 p.m., climbing at a rate that pressed Marcus back into the leather seat and spooled the November weather beneath them in a matter of seconds. The aircraft broke through the cloud layer at 11,000 feet and burst into something completely different. A black sky with cold, brilliant stars, the storm reduced to a gray blanket far below city lights, blinking up through the gaps like signals from a world that was already receding. Elena Torres appeared from the forward galley with a warm towel on a silver tray. Marcus took it and pressed it against his face. He held it there for a moment, the heat of it moving into the tension around his eyes, his jaw, the back of his neck. He had been holding that tension for 3 days, the boardroom, the hostile bid, the 72 hours of not fully exhaling. And then the terminal. He let himself feel the full weight of the last hour, not with drama, but simply with honesty, the way you acknowledge what something costs before you put it down. He put it down. "Can I get you something before dinner?" "Mr. Ellison," Elena asked. Her voice carried the warmth of someone who had worked alongside this man long enough to know when to be fully present and when to give him room. "The coffee, please. And then dinner, whenever it is ready." He paused. "How was the hold over Newark Smooth once we got above it? Captain Okafor found a good altitude." She smiled. Brief, genuine. "He was glad to see you board." Marcus nodded. He moved back to the conference table and sat. He opened his laptop and made 2 calls, both brief. The first was to Tom Briggs, who answered from his home office in Connecticut, with the focused alertness of a man who had been expecting the call. "I saw the tail telemetry," Tom said. "You are up." "How was the walkthrough thorough?" Marcus said. "Diane Hartley has been formally terminated. I need you to manage the transition directly. Place an interim manager within 48 hours and begin the search for a permanent replacement. The search criteria are simple. I want someone who greets every arrival the same way, regardless of what they look like. That is the only qualification that matters to me." "Understood," Tom said, writing. "I will handle it personally. I also want a full review of the staff culture across all Apex terminals within 60 days. Not a compliance exercise. A real one. I want to know how the frontline people actually operate." "Done." Marcus ended the call. The second call was to Arthur Calloway. Arthur answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the particular ease of a man who keeps late hours and does not experience them as inconvenient. "Marcus, I was wondering if I would hear from you tonight. You have probably already heard something," Marcus said. A brief pause. "I received a call from one of my people about an hour ago. He had a version of the story that I found unsatisfying. The accurate version," Marcus said, "involves your VP telling a room of witnesses that he would love to see me removed in handcuffs after telling them I was running a scam. That was before he knew who I was. The relevant detail, I would suggest, is that none of it should have required knowing who I was." Silence on the line. "I agree. Completely," Arthur said. His voice had gone from ease to precision. The shift of a man who has moved from social register to operational one. "I am dealing with it." "I know," Marcus said. "That is why I am calling to close the subject rather than open it. I do not want this to become a thing between us, Arthur. I want it to become a thing that you handled because it needed handling, and that is the end of it." "That is exactly what it is," Arthur said quietly. "And Marcus, for what it is worth, I am sorry it happened." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said finally, and there was something in his voice. Not bitterness, not acceptance, but something between them. Something that both men understood without naming. "Have a good night." He closed the laptop. Elena brought the coffee. He held the cup and looked out the oval window at the stars. He thought about the terminal. Not with anger. He had spent anger on rooms like that before, and he had learned that anger is a resource, and rooms like that terminal had taken enough of his resources already. He thought about it with something quieter. A kind of reckoning. The specific weight of a man who has been told in 100 different ways across a lifetime that the room he is in is not for him, and who has spent that lifetime proving the rooms wrong, one acquisition at a time, one boardroom at a time, one terminal walkthrough at a time. He was 41 years old, and he was tired in the way that goes deeper than sleep can fix, and he was also underneath that something he did not always let himself fully acknowledge proud. Not of the jet, or the valuation, or any of the exterior things. Proud of the decision he had made standing at the glass wall. Proud of the fact that he had stayed. He had stayed wearing what he was wearing, being who he was, without performing or proving or diminishing himself by a single degree. And the truth had arrived exactly as he had known it would. The G700 was at 43,000 feet. Now the engines a smooth, steady hum. The stars outside the oval window cold and brilliant and indifferent to everything that had happened in that terminal below. London in 7 hours. He closed his eyes. By the time the G700 was somewhere over the dark middle of the Atlantic, Sophia Reyes's video had been watched 2.1 million times. It was not going viral in the way that things usually go viral. The rapid hot spread of something sensational, grabbed and reshared by people who will forget it by morning. It was moving differently. Slower in some ways and deeper. People were not just watching it and scrolling. People were pausing it. screenshotting the moment Captain Okafor walked through the door, sending it directly to specific people in their lives with a message that said, "Watch this," or "This is what I have been trying to explain," or simply "Watch." The comments were not a debate. That surprised Sophia, who had learned over 6 years of posting that the comments are almost always a debate. Instead, they were something rarer, a collection of testimony. People writing in the specific, unguarded tone of those who have recognized something true. A high school teacher in Memphis wrote, "I have been asked to use the service entrance of schools I work in. Still happens." A physician in Toronto wrote, "The number of times I have been handed the wrong lanyard in my own hospital. I stopped correcting people." A young man who listed his location as Atlanta wrote, "The stillness. That is what I want for myself. To be that still." A security guard wrote, "I have been Carlos Vega. I am going to be different." A terminal manager in Dallas wrote, "We are revising our welcome protocol this week. This video is going on our staff training screen." Sophia read every comment she could reach. She did not feel in that moment like someone who had captured a humiliation. She felt like someone who had pointed a camera at dignity in a moment when dignity was under pressure and had documented that it held. That was different. That mattered in a different way. She reposted the video in the morning with a single addition: a line of text over the image of the empty VIP parking spot before the jet arrived. He already knew. He was just waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. It was shared 400,000 times in the next 6 hours. 6 weeks after the night at Teterboro, the Pinnacle Aviation Terminal had a new front desk manager. Her name was Amara Diallo. She was 33 years old, and her parents had come to the United States from Guinea when she was 2, and she had grown up in Newark, which meant she had looked at Teterboro Airport from the other side of the highway her entire childhood at the jets taking off and landing with their running lights in the dark, and had built her career slowly and deliberately toward a world that those lights represented. She had 10 years in aviation hospitality. She was known among the people who had worked alongside her for a specific quality that was difficult to put into rules. She was the same with everyone. Not as a policy, genuinely naturally as the default expression of how she understood her role. She greeted arrivals the way you greet a neighbor you are glad to see, with the assumption extended immediately and without condition that their presence was expected and welcome. On her first morning before her shift began, she found a card on the desk. It was in an unmarked envelope with her name on it. She opened it. The card was from Tom Briggs, and it read, "The one qualification for this role is how you treat someone who walks through that door looking like they do not belong. We believe you already know this. Welcome to Pinnacle Aviation." Amara folded the card and put it in the pocket of her blazer. She straightened the leather folder on the desk. She made sure the coffee was ready. She looked at the fireplace, at the amber lighting, at the rain against the glass. It was raining again, the same cold November weather the terminal had seen 6 weeks ago, and she felt the weight of the room settle around her, not as a burden, but as a responsibility she was ready for. Ready. The glass doors opened. A young man walked in, college-age backpack over one shoulder, headphones around his neck, sneakers with a crease across the toe. He looked around the lounge with the slightly uncertain expression of someone who is not sure they have the right building. Amara smiled. Not the practiced kind. Not the conditional kind. The real kind. The kind that comes from a person who has decided that the default expression of this room is welcome, and is committed to maintaining that default for every person who comes through that door, regardless of what they are wearing, or where they came from, or what they look like. "Welcome to Pinnacle Aviation," she said. "Can I help you find where you are going?" The young man looked at her, and the uncertainty in his face resolved into something simpler. He walked to the desk. 6 weeks after Teterboro, Marcus Ellison was sitting in a conference room in London. He was in the suit now. The charcoal Tom Ford, the platinum watch, the crisp white shirt. The deal had been good. The European expansion was ahead of schedule. His operations director, a woman named Claudine, had run the meetings with the precision and warmth that made her irreplaceable, and Marcus had sat beside her and felt the quiet satisfaction of watching someone he had believed in deliver. The room was emptying when one of his junior associates approached. Her name was Zara. 26, first year on his international team, quick and careful, and still in the process of learning when to speak and when to watch. She had the kind of ambition that had not yet hardened into ego, which Marcus considered one of the most valuable qualities a young person in business could have. She stopped a few feet from him. She was holding her notepad against her chest. She looked like she was deciding something. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "I saw the video from Teterboro. The one that went around." She paused. "I wanted to ask you, how did you stay that calm?" Marcus looked at her. He thought about it genuinely, not about the right answer, about the actual answer, the one that was true. "I have been in that room before," he said, 100 versions of it, and for a long time my response was to prove something. Pull out the credentials, say the title, make them understand on their terms, and it never really worked. Not the way I wanted it to, because the proof was never what those rooms were actually asking for. "What were they asking for?" Zara said. "Departure," Marcus said simply. "They wanted me to leave, and for a long time I accommodated that one way or another. I made myself smaller or more legible or easier to absorb. I translated myself into a language those rooms would accept." He paused. "And then I got tired of translating." Zara was quiet, listening. "I stopped trying to make them see me the way they needed me to be seen." Marcus continued. "And I started just being there, fully, exactly as I am. The truth finds its own way into a room eventually. You just have to be standing in it when it does." "What if you do not have the acquisition documents in your bag?" Zara said. "What if you are not the CEO?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "Then you are still a person who walked through the door," he said. "And that is enough. It has always been enough. The problem was never with you." Zara wrote something in her notebook. Marcus picked up his bag. The same scuffed leather backpack returned from the aircraft seam still unsewn, and moved toward the door. At the threshold he stopped. He did not fully turn around. He spoke over his shoulder the way you offer something to a room you are leaving. "Zara, the calmest person in any room is almost always the most powerful one, not because they are hiding something, because they do not need to perform it." He walked out. Zara looked down at her notebook. She had written 2 lines. "The truth finds its own way in. Be there when it does." She closed the notebook and held it against her chest for a moment, the same way she had been holding it when she first walked over. Then she put it in her bag and walked toward the door. Marcus Ellison flew home to New York 3 days later on the same G700 in the same backpack, wearing a different hoodie. Captain Okafor had the routing already filed. Elena had the coffee ready. The stars over the Atlantic were the same cold, indifferent stars they always were. The Pinnacle Aviation Terminal at Teterboro had a new manager, a new welcome protocol, and a card on the front desk that every staff member read on their first day. The card said one thing: treat every arrival as if they built this room. Diane Hartley was not in private aviation anymore. Officer Vega completed his training in 24 days, 2 weeks ahead of the deadline, and returned to his post. Richard Ackman spent 4 months on administrative leave and came back to a smaller role in a quieter office and was by all accounts more careful with his words. But none of that was the point. The point was a man in a faded navy hoodie standing at a glass wall in the rain, waiting without apology for the truth to arrive. Not performing strength, not proving belonging, just standing there fully himself in a room that had tried to refuse him until the room had no choice but to understand what it had been looking at all along. Dignity does not need a dress code. It does not need a credential or a title or a jet at the window. It only needs to stay in the room. If this story moved you, if you have ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told that the room was not for you, do not keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Because every week, we bring you stories exactly like this one. Stories about dignity, about justice, about what happens when people refuse to be made small. Like this video, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and we will see you in the next one.